My name is Alyssa Turner. I'm 30 years old and my life hasn't exactly been an easy ride. From a young age, my father Brad imposed his unrealistic expectations and harsh rules on me, leaving little room for joy or self-expression. I took after my father, who had a small nose and somewhat plain eyes. Though I wouldn't call him unattractive, he was just more unremarkable than anything else. My mother Joan was the opposite. Her sharp, elegant features stood out, and she was stunning in a way that turned heads wherever she went. Everything about her was refined, the epitome of classic beauty. She even graced the pages of magazines with her flawless looks, her confidence practically radiating from the photos. On a few occasions, she appeared on local TV shows as a model, adding yet another layer to her glamorous image. My mother carried that pride throughout her life, relishing the envy and admiration of those around her. Dad, too, seemed proud to have such a beautiful wife, though he never expressed it outright. Looking back now, the comments from our neighbors also seemed wildly inappropriate, though I didn't realize it as a child. "Too bad you didn't take after your mom," they say with a chuckle that I was too young to understand. At the time, their words didn't make sense to me. I was too naive to grasp the subtle cruelty behind them. When I'd stand in front of the mirror trying to imitate Joan's expressions, her reaction was always the same. "There isn't a single feature of mine in you. You're just not cute." Her words carried a sting that was hard to shake off, but they came so casually, as if she didn't realize how much they hurt. Hearing things like that throughout my childhood made it almost impossible for me to develop any sense of self-confidence. I thought, what's the point of trying? I'm ugly, and I stopped putting any effort into my appearance. While the other girls at school experimented with fashion and makeup, I was the type to sit in the corner, sketching comics and grinning at my own jokes. The only friends I had in class were fellow misfits. Kids who preferred books, comics, and video games to popularity contests. I felt safe in that circle. Even when people teased me about my looks, it didn't bother me too much because I had a place where I belonged. But one thing I could control was my academics. I worked hard and excelled at school. I made it into a competitive high school and constantly vied for the top spot in my class rankings. The only really ally I had in that house was my grandmother on Dad's side, who lived with us. Grandma Alice was kind and soft-spoken, and she always made time to listen to whatever I had to say. When I was little, she'd pull me onto her lap, brushing my hair gently as she spoke. "Listen to me, Alyssa. You need to leave this house as soon as you can. You're so smart. It would be such a waste for you to stay here and let them drag you down. You don't deserve to live in a place where people speak to you so cruelly." As she said those words, she patted my head in a way that made me feel like someone truly cared. It was those moments of kindness that kept me going when everything else felt too heavy. One thing she always told me stuck. "Learn a skill you can rely on, Alyssa. That'll be your ticket out." When I was in high school, I spent countless hours agonizing over what to write on my career planning sheet. My classmates seemed to have their paths figured out. Some had jobs lined up, others were set on college. I was torn between chasing my dream of becoming a comic artist and pursuing a practical career as a nurse. The idea of becoming a comic artist was exciting, and I seriously considered enrolling in an art school. I had confidence in my ability to draw. My sketches were the one thing that made me feel proud. I had even submitted some of my work to publishers, though the best I ever got was an honorable mention. Even so, those small wins fueled my determination to keep drawing. But I knew the reality. Only a handful of people could make a living as comic artists. There was no guarantee of success, and I couldn't afford to take that kind of risk. At the same time, I wanted to honor my grandmother's advice and make use of the education I'd worked so hard for. One thing was certain, I wanted to go to college. With that decision in mind, I finally worked up the courage to talk to my parents about it. My father ran a small business. He liked to call himself a CEO, though this company wasn't much more than a local shop. I assumed they'd at least help with the cost of college. After all, wasn't that what parents were supposed to do? One evening, when my father came home earlier than usual, I nervously approached my parents to bring it up. "I need to talk to you about something." "What is it now?" She sank into her favorite recliner, exuding more authority than my father ever did. My father glanced at me with a bored expression before asking, "What is it? You want something?" His tone made me hesitate, but I forced myself to speak. "It's about college." "College? Yeah, that's not happening." I didn't even get the chance to explain before he shut me down. "What? Why not?" "Why? Because we have Lana, that's why." She let out an exaggerated sigh like the whole conversation was exhausting her. Lana, my younger sister, was 9 years younger than me. My mother had always wanted a prettier daughter to replace me, and so Lana was born, my mother's second chance at perfection. Oddly enough, the day Lana was born was one of the happiest of my life. I loved having a baby in the house. She was adorable, and I adored her from the start. I spent hours playing with her, reading her stories, and falling asleep beside her crib. And yet, to hear that Lana's existence somehow meant I couldn't go to college, I couldn't wrap my head around it. That doesn't make any sense. How's that a reason to stop me from going to college? My hands trembled as I spoke, trying to keep my voice steady. That's just the way it is. You'll have to give it up. Just like that, they dismissed me and returned to their own distractions. My father to the TV, my mother to her magazine. As I stood there, frozen and furious, Lana skipped past me with a big smile, running straight to our mother. "Mommy, look at this. I really want this necklace," she chirped, holding up a picture from a catalog. "Oh, that's lovely, and it would look so pretty on you, sweetheart. Why don't we go buy it?" Hearing that, I couldn't help but think, if you have money for things like that, why can't you help with my college tuition? I hated that the thought even crossed my mind, but it did. Lana was the spitting image of my mother, and she adored her for it. Whatever Lana wanted, ballet, piano lessons, art classes, it was hers. Of course, she never stuck with any of it. Everything was a phase that lasted a few weeks at most. I often wondered, what would she have done if Lana hadn't inherited her looks? Would she have spoiled her so much? "Alyssa, are you done talking?" Her face, so carefree and untouched by hardship, was the last thing I wanted to see right then. "Yeah, I'm done." I turned and headed straight for my grandmother's room, the only place in the house where I felt I could breathe. She looked up at me with a mix of concern and warmth, as she always did. "Oh, sweetheart, I wish I could pay for you to go. I really do." "It's okay." I couldn't let her see how much it hurt, so I smiled weakly instead. It was all I could do. The next day, I went to my guidance counselor and told him I wouldn't be pursuing college after all. "Are you sure about this, Alyssa? You worked so hard, and your grades are excellent. Scholarships are just loans in disguise, and there's no guarantee I get a stable job afterward." I smiled as if it didn't matter, but deep down, it felt like I was giving up on myself. By senior year, the air was electric with excitement as my classmates prepared for college applications and entrance exams. Meanwhile, I spent my free time in the career counseling office, searching for job openings. That's when I found it, a listing for a nursing program at a nearby hospital. I had walked past that flyer a dozen times, but never really noticed it until then. The flyer mentioned that the hospital offered a scholarship program for students who worked part-time while completing their training. If I worked at the hospital for a few years after graduation, I wouldn't even need to pay back any student loans. The only catch was that applicants had to be in the top 2 of their graduating class and receive a recommendation from the school. Could this be my way out? I thought, my heart racing with cautious hope. I ran back to my guidance counselor's office, clutching the flyer like it was my lifeline. "Look at this. Why didn't you tell me about this program before?" I was breathless and almost in tears. "I'm sorry, Alyssa. Let's get your paperwork ready right away. The deadline is coming up fast." With trembling hands, I filled out the application, fighting back tears of relief and fear. I handed the forms to my counselor, hoping it wasn't already too late. When I told my parents about the program, they hardly showed any interest. To my parents, anything that didn't affect their wallets directly wasn't worth their attention. My father barely even acknowledged me when I brought it up. He was like a ghost in his own home. "I think I'm going to pursue nursing." "Sure, why not? It's not like you've got anything else going for you." He laughed as though it was a joke, but I could feel the sting of his judgment. I worked hard, aced the interview, and by winter I had secured my place in the nursing program. When the acceptance letter came, my guidance counselor and I celebrated together. I think he was even more excited than I was. For the first time in my life, it felt like I was taking a step toward something that was truly mine. My friends were thrilled for me, cheering me on with words of encouragement. I told myself that I would still pursue comics someday, once my life was more stable. But for now, the most important thing was getting out of that house. With that determination, I enrolled in the nursing school associated with the hospital. The program was fully residential, which meant I'd finally get to leave home. During the day, I'd work at the hospital as a nursing assistant, gaining hands-on experience. It also came with a small paycheck, which felt like the first step toward independence. Just days after graduating high school, I was in my room packing my things, preparing for the move to the dorms. Take this with you, my grandmother said, handing me something wrapped in tissue paper. She placed it gently in my hands, her expression both proud and a little sad. What is this? I can't take this. I tried to return it, but she shook her head firmly. No, Alyssa, use this to buy something nice for yourself. Don't forget that you're worth it, okay? Never forget your pride. Her eyes locked on mine, full of a quiet strength that I knew I'd carry with me forever. I felt tears welling up, but she just smiled at me, as if telling me to be strong. You're beautiful, Alyssa. Don't ever doubt that. She was the only person who had ever told me that. With my meager belongings, I left for the dorms, feeling lighter than I ever had before. Don't come crawling back halfway through. She smiled in that cruel, mocking way of hers as she saw me off. Lana came out to wave goodbye but quickly lost interest and ran back inside. As I walked away, I couldn't help but shake my head. This is my family, all right. What a mess. What followed was a whirlwind of grueling days at the hospital and nights spent studying. The senior nurses didn't go easy on me, and there were plenty of nights when I cried myself to sleep. More times than I could count. I thought, maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I should just quit. But during those moments, I'd pull out the one luxury item I'd bought with my grandmother's gift, a beautiful leather wallet. Looking at it reminded me of her words, and it gave me the strength to keep going. I'll keep pushing until I'm the kind of man who can carry this with pride, I told myself, and that became my resolve. After 3 years later, my mother called me out of the blue, a rare occurrence given how little contact we had since I left. Honestly, I didn't even think she knew my phone number. That's how disconnected we were. Alyssa, your grandmother passed away. The way she said it, so quick and emotionless, made it hard for me to process what she just told me. Wait, what? When did this happen? Oh, about 2 months ago, I think. I was so shocked by her indifference that I decided to return to my hometown to see for myself. When I got there, all that remained was an empty house and the memory of my grandmother. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I'm telling you now, aren't I? As I stood there, Lana appeared, looking like a grown-up version of the child I'd left behind. She had grown a lot taller since I'd last seen her, though the expression on her face hadn't changed one bit. At 12, she already had the kind of figure that made people do a double take. What's going on? Why aren't you at school? Just taking care of Grandma's things. She gave a little laugh like she wasn't affected at all. Mom, can I throw out the stuff in her room now? She was talking about Grandma's room, the one place in that house that had always felt like a sanctuary to me. I followed Lana, unsure of what she was planning. Sure enough, she headed straight for Grandma's room, the door slightly ajar. When I stepped inside, I saw her throwing Grandma's belongings out the window like they were trash. What the hell are you doing? Lana turned to look at me, her expression unfazed. What does it look like? I'm cleaning. This is going to be my room now. She said it like it was the most natural thing in the world, like Grandma's life didn't matter at all. My eyes fell on a photo she was about to toss, a black and white picture of Grandma and Grandpa on their wedding day. Don't you dare throw this out. It was their wedding photo, and it was precious. What does it matter? She's gone. It's not like she's ever going to look at it again. Lana, how can you even say that? The way she looked at me, the way she spoke, it was like staring at a younger version of my mother. It was clear that Lana had been completely poisoned by her influence. I stared at her, shocked and heartbroken. Memories of the Lana I once knew flooded my mind, her baby smile, the way she'd giggle when we played together. But the girl in front of me now wasn't that same little sister. She was spoiled and selfish, molded into something unrecognizable. In that moment, I made a decision. I'm done. I'm never coming back to this house, and I don't consider you my family anymore. Good. I've never thought of you as my daughter anyway. Both my mother and Lana laughed, as if my words meant nothing to them. I couldn't forgive them for how they treated my grandmother, for how they erased her memory so easily. I left that house, vowing never to return. I told myself I'd never go back to that house again. It wasn't a home. It was a prison, and walking away from it felt like finally breaking free. From that moment on, I threw myself into my work with everything I had. No matter how hard things got, I reminded myself that anything was better than going back there. All the late nights and early mornings paid off. I graduated at the top of my class just as I had promised myself I would. Now I work as a registered nurse at a large hospital. The days are long and the work is grueling, but it's the kind of exhaustion that feels earned. At work, even the senior nurses trust me to handle tough situations. Being seen as reliable is something I never thought I'd achieve. And then, amidst the chaos of my career, I met someone who changed everything. 2 years ago, I met Mark. He worked as an occupational therapist at the hospital, and we hit it off almost immediately. I was drawn to the way he spoke, gentle yet confident, and the care he put into his work. Watching him interact with patients made me see a kind of warmth I hadn't known existed. I've been surrounded by healthcare workers for years, but something about Mark made my heart race in a way it never had before. It was probably the first time I'd ever been in love, not with a fantasy or a daydream, but with a real person. As we worked together, our bond grew naturally. We started talking during breaks, then having lunch together, and before I knew it, we were inseparable. I've met people who love comics before, but you're the first person I've ever met who actually draws them. What? There's at least one in every class. That was me. The way Mark listened so intently as if my past really mattered to him made me fall for him even harder. We decided to skip the big wedding. Neither of us wanted anything flashy, so we opted for a quiet courthouse ceremony. Out of courtesy, I let my father know I was getting married. I'm getting married, I told him over the phone. Oh, well, congrats. That was the extent of his reaction, short and indifferent, as if I'd told him the weather forecast. My father had always been emotionally distant, so I didn't let it bother me. Even now, I can't say I fully understand him. Maybe I never will. After the wedding, Mark and I bought a small pre-owned apartment close to the hospital. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. I didn't bother telling my family where we moved. Besides, if I told them, I knew they'd find a way to barge into our lives uninvited. They'd probably spend the whole time trying to one-up me with their usual backhanded comments. Being nearly estranged from them has brought me a kind of peace I never thought possible. Mark and I have started talking about having kids, but like most things in life, it hasn't been as simple as we hoped. Our schedules are part of the problem. I work long shifts as a floor nurse, often overnight, while Mark has his own demanding caseload. On my rare days off, Mark is often at a workshop or training session. The little time we do get together is precious, but it feels like we're always rushing to make it count. I've thought about leaving my job, but it feels like too much of a waste after everything I've worked for. Instead, I've started drawing comics again, a way to relieve stress and reconnect with a part of myself I'd almost forgotten. This time, it's not about getting published or impressing anyone. It's just for me, and that's enough. With all the digital tools available now, drawing has become easier than ever. I can sketch anywhere, anytime. That's how I spend my quiet evenings, drawing and waiting for Mark to come home. One evening, as I sat at my desk sketching, my phone buzzed on the table next to me. I paused, half expecting it to be Mark, but instead I saw my mother's name flash across the screen. Lately, my mother had been calling more often, much to my annoyance. What could she possibly want with a daughter she'd ignored for years? The few times I'd answered, her calls had mostly been about two things: complaints about my father or asking me for money. How she had the audacity to ask for money after belittling me for so long was beyond me. Did she have no pride left? Or had she simply never cared enough to have any? Reluctantly, I picked up, knowing from experience that ignoring her would only make her call again and again. Finally, you should really pick up the phone faster. What do you want? I barely got the words out before she launched into her latest grievance. Your father and I got into a fight again. Apparently, my parents' relationship had been on the rocks lately. Not that it surprised me. From what I gathered, my father was finally fed up with my mother's reckless spending. I always thought my father didn't care about anything she did, so for him to actually get angry, it had to be serious. But honestly, I didn't want to get involved, so I let her ramble without really listening. Still, I felt a pang of guilt. Why couldn't I cut her off completely? Why was I still answering her calls? I told myself I was done with her and Lana, yet here I was, keeping that thread of communication alive, although barely. I wasn't going back to that house, and yet I'd even lent her money once or twice, just to get her to stop pestering me. I sighed deeply, frustrated with myself as much as with her. By the way, didn't you move recently? Yeah, I did. Lana's upset. She says she tried sending you a letter, but it didn't go through. A letter? Why would Lana, of all people, need to send me a letter? Before I could ask, my mother dropped the real bombshell. Oh, so I just told her to send it to your work. Make sure you handle it properly. Wait, what? You told her to send it to my job? But before I could say anything else, the line went dead. What on earth had Lana sent to my workplace? The next morning, I went to work with a knot in my stomach, dreading what might be awaiting for me. When I arrived at the nurse's station, there it was, a letter with my name scrawled across the envelope, sitting on the table. What? A wedding invitation? Flipping it over, I saw the sender's name, Lana, of course. The fact that she'd sent it to my workplace because she didn't know my home address was absurd, but not surprising. Inside was an invitation to her wedding. So it seemed Lana was getting married. The invitation confirmed it with bold, elegant lettering that read, "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Lana Turner and Aaron Whitaker." Traditionally, as our older sister, I was expected to attend. That was the polite family thing to do. But after more than 3 years of being completely estranged, showing up now felt strange, like I'd be stepping back into a life I'd left behind. During my lunch break, I opened the invitation fully and saw the details. The ceremony was set for 2 months from now. Almost as if she knew I was reading it, my phone buzzed again with another call from my mother. It was eerie, like she was watching me. Reluctantly, I answered, figuring I might as well address the invitation directly. "Hi, so Lana's getting married?" "Oh, you got it. Isn't it exciting? It's going to be such a beautiful event." She talked as if it were her own wedding, giddy and proud. Apparently, Lana's fiancé, Aaron, was someone she'd met in college. He'd been her senior and was somewhat famous as a student entrepreneur who had started a small tech company. From what my mother said, the two had hit it off quickly, with Lana captivated by his ambition and charm. And they just decided to get married this quickly. Before I could say more, my mother continued, "And guess what? They're expecting a baby next year." I could hear her laughing on the other end, delighted by the news. Oh, so they found out about the baby first. It made sense now. The rushed timeline, the overly elaborate wedding, it all felt like an attempt to cover up the pregnancy. My mother went on to explain that Lana had dropped out of college to focus on getting married and preparing for motherhood. I couldn't help but think, what a waste. "So, do you want me to come to the wedding?" "Of course, you're coming. You're her sister." Her tone was sharp and commanding, leaving no room for argument. "Fine, I'll be there." As soon as I agreed, her voice lightened, and she quickly changed the subject. "Oh, by the way, about that money I mentioned earlier, could you transfer it soon? Thanks." She hung up before I could even respond, leaving me sitting there, phone in hand, trying to process everything. As always, my needs and feelings didn't factor into her plans. I sat there staring at my phone, thinking about Lana, about how much had changed between us and how little I wanted to see her again. In the end, Lana had gotten everything, the college tuition, the attention, and now she's even pregnant before me. She had everything I had once dreamed of, as if she'd effortlessly stepped into the life I could never have. The looks, the education, the baby, it was all hers. A dark, bitter feeling started to creep through me. This is why I'm so ugly, because I think things like this, I whispered to myself, ashamed of my own resentment. When I got home that evening, Mark was already there, busy making dinner in our small but cozy kitchen. "I'm making pasta tonight. That okay with you?" "Yeah, that sounds great." I set my bag down and curled up on the couch, pulling my knees to my chest. Mark must have noticed something was off because he walked over and sat down next to me, his face full of quiet concern. "Rough day? Do you want to talk about it?" His voice was so calm, so steady. It was a kind of kindness I wasn't used to, but desperately needed. I told him everything, the call from my mother, Lana's wedding, and all the emotions it has stirred up. As I spoke, the tears I'd been holding back all day started to fall. All the anger, frustration, and sadness I'd buried for years came rushing to the surface unstoppable. "That's a lot to deal with. I'm sorry they put you through that. You don't have to go to the wedding, Alyssa. It's totally your choice. You don't owe them anything." Hearing Mark say that made the storm inside me calm, even if just a little. I'm an adult now and I can make my own choices. After a few days of going back and forth in my mind, I finally checked the will attend box on Lana's invitation. A few days later, my mother called again, this time to say, "If you're coming, make sure you dress appropriately. Don't embarrass us." Her words stung as if I didn't already know what she thought of me. It would be my first time attending a wedding, and I wanted to make sure I looked presentable, if only for myself. I decided to buy a new dress, a simple navy blue one with lace detailing on one shoulder. When I tried it on at home, Mark's reaction caught me by surprise. "Wow, you look absolutely stunning." I don't know about that. I brushed off his compliment like I always did. "I'm serious, Alyssa. You're beautiful. You just don't see it." The way he said it, like it was the most natural thing in the world, made me tear up again, though this time it wasn't from sadness. Did I say something wrong? I couldn't help but laugh at his expression, shaking my head. "No, Mark, you're the only one who's ever said something like that to me." In that moment, I realized again how lucky I was to have him. 2 months later, on the day of Lana's wedding, I arrived at the venue, a brand new hotel in the heart of the city. It was obvious this wasn't my family's doing. Lana's in-laws must have footed the bill, as it was a far cry from anything we could have afforded. Sure, my father called himself a CEO, but his small business was nothing compared to the wealth and status on display here. My mother had mentioned that Aaron's family was loaded, and now I could see it for myself. As I stepped into the lobby, I suddenly wondered if my modest dress was enough for a place like this. The wedding was on the 3rd floor, so I took the sleek, gold-trimmed elevator up, feeling a little out of place. When the doors opened, the first thing I saw was a beautifully decorated welcome board covered in photos of Lana and Aaron. And there were pictures of the happy couple alongside childhood photos of them both. Lana, of course, looked picture perfect in every shot. One section was titled Our Family. And there I was, frozen mid-silly face in a candid photo I didn't even know existed. Next to me was Lana, looking flawless, as always. Why would they use this one? I muttered under my breath, cringing. But I shook the thought away. This wasn't the time to dwell on petty things. With a deep breath, I made my way to the reception desk. A woman in a sleek black dress greeted me with a polite smile. I handed over the wedding card and received a program in return. I flipped through it, scanning the seating chart for my name in the family section, but no matter how many times I checked, my name wasn't there. I thought maybe I'd been excluded from the family section, but as I kept looking, I realized my name wasn't listed anywhere. Just then, I spotted my mother heading toward the restroom, her posture as poised as ever. "Mom." "Oh, Alyssa, it's you." She smelled faintly of wine, and her slightly flushed cheeks confirmed she'd been drinking. In her black dress and perfectly styled hair, she looked as stunning as ever, just like she always did in public. "There's no seat for me." She sighed loudly, as if I were being difficult on purpose. "Why did you even bother showing up? If she didn't want me here, why send the invitation in the first place? You're not really family anymore, Alyssa. Just leave your gift and go." I could almost hear Lana laughing along with her in my mind, the two of them so perfectly aligned in their disdain for me. I was stunned, unable to find the words to respond. They both looked so polished and perfect on the outside, but inside, they hadn't grown at all. Without saying another word, I turned on my heel and left the hotel, not even glancing back. For the first time, I felt an odd sense of relief. Cutting ties with them completely was no longer a decision I had to wrestle with. It was made for me. On my way out, I called Mark and asked him to pick me up at the nearest station. He didn't ask any questions when he arrived. He just smiled and opened the car door for me. "Let's go out for dinner. You're all dressed up. It'd be a shame to waste it." "Yeah, that sounds nice." We ended up at a small, upscale restaurant near the station, the kind of place we didn't go to often but always enjoyed. Sitting there with him, I realized how long it had been since we'd had a quiet moment like this together. After dinner, as I sipped my coffee, my phone buzzed again. Who's calling? I glanced at the screen. First, it was my mother, then Lana. One call right after the other. It was like they were taking turns, as if determined to get through to me. I stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. Finally, I gave in and picked up. "This is your fault. You've ruined everything, you miserable brat." Her anger caught me off guard, and I found myself asking, "What are you even talking about?" "You know exactly what you did." And just like that, the call was over. Confused and unsettled, I turned to Mark. "I don't know what's going on, but I think something happened." Mark chuckled softly, his calm demeanor somehow grounding me. "Actually, there's something I need to tell you." Mark took a deep breath, his expression shifting to something more serious, almost hesitant. "So, a little while ago, I heard something from a friend." "A friend?" I could feel a mix of unease and curiosity bubbling up inside me as I urged him to continue. "You know how I sometimes go back to my old school to give guest lectures?" "Yeah," I said slowly, still unsure of where this was leading. "Well, there was this student, Lucas. I just found out recently that he used to date Lana." The moment I heard that name, my chest tightened. Lucas? At first, he seemed like just another student, bright, hard-working, but one day he started talking about his girlfriend. He told me my girlfriend got pregnant, and then she just disappeared. The pit in my stomach grew deeper. I felt a wave of unease wash over me. "Wait, are you saying that was Lana?" "Yeah." He showed me a picture of her and said, "This is her, this is Lana." Mark pulled out his phone and showed me a picture Lucas had given him. I stared at the screen, and there was no doubt. It was Lana. My hands trembled as I held the phone, my mind racing, unable to form words. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "I wasn't sure how you'd take it. I wanted to wait until the right moment, but I couldn't keep it from you anymore." "And Lucas? What did he do?" "I told him about the wedding." Why? Because his story didn't sit right with me. I wanted him to know the truth, whether she was really pregnant or if it was all a lie. He deserved to know. Mark, usually so calm and collected, sounded genuinely upset. I tried to process everything he was saying, even as my thoughts spiraled. So I told him, go to the wedding. See for yourself. I couldn't hide my shock at Mark's confession. Mark, you actually told him to do that? Honestly, I didn't think he'd go that far. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to comprehend what this meant. For Lana, for Lucas, for me. The next morning, I made the reluctant decision to call my father. I figured he'd be the most rational person to talk to. More so than my mother or Lana, at least. Dad, sorry about yesterday, I started, though I wasn't even sure what I was apologizing for. Not that it would undo anything that had happened or take back the hurtful words they'd thrown at me. But Lana called last night, furious. What happened? My father sighed deeply, then started explaining what had gone down at the wedding. He told me that everything had been going smoothly until the moment Lana walked down the aisle with him. My father explained that it all started when the guests moved into the chapel and he began walking Lana down the aisle. Suddenly, a man in plain clothes burst through the doors shouting, "Stop the wedding!" It was like something straight out of a movie. The man sprinted toward Lana, his voice echoing through the room. Lana froze in shock as he approached, letting out a startled gasp. Lucas? In that instant, it became clear that Lucas's story about her pregnancy and her vanishing act was true. Why are you marrying him? That baby, you told me it's mine. Everyone in the chapel, family, friends, and Aaron's well-dressed guests sat in stunned silence, staring at the scene unfolding before them. Lana stood frozen, while Aaron, her fiancé, rushed forward to block Lucas from coming any closer. It took several hotel staff to restrain Lucas and drag him out of the room, though not before he yelled more accusations. She lied to me! She left me! After Lucas was removed, Lana fled to the bridal suite in tears, with Aaron following close behind, visibly angry. What's going on? Is the baby not mine? No, it's yours, I swear. As it turned out, Lucas wasn't just a random man. He was Lana's ex-boyfriend, the one she had been seeing before Aaron. Apparently, when Lana found out she was pregnant, she both told Lucas and Aaron, hedging her bets on who would stick around. It was like she created a safety net, choosing whoever would provide her with a better future. Of course, Aaron, with his successful career and a wealthy family, was the obvious choice. But now, with Lucas's outburst, everything was falling apart. Lucas, still a student with uncertain prospects, had clearly been the backup plan. When Aaron agreed to marry her, Lana must have thought she secured her future. But now everything she'd worked for was crumbling before her eyes, right in the middle of the wedding. My father's voice trailed off as if even he didn't know what else to say about the disaster. The silence on the phone felt heavy, suffocating. Dad, I don't think I need to hear anymore. Fair enough. Anyway, the wedding's been called off. Hearing those words, I felt an odd sense of relief, like the closure I didn't realize I needed. It felt like poetic justice, as if life had finally caught up with Lana and my mother. After that disastrous day, my mother and Lana went completely silent. No calls, no texts, nothing. It was as if they'd fallen off the face of earth. But through whispers and secondhand stories, I eventually heard what became of them. The wedding had been officially canceled, and Aaron's family was furious, humiliated by what they called a circus act. Aaron's parents wasted no time sending my parents a formal demand to reimburse the entire cost of the wedding. The amount was staggering, far more than my mother could ever hope to pay, even if she sold everything she owned. True to form, my mother marched straight to Aaron's family's home, screaming and cursing at them. "How dare you? We're the victims here!" She reportedly shouted as if somehow she was the one wronged. But Aaron's parents, clearly people accustomed to handling conflict, remained calm. The louder my mother got, the more resolute they became, eventually threatening legal action if she didn't pay up. In the end, unable to pay or negotiate her way out, my mother defaulted on her own mounting debts. She was evicted from our family home shortly after. As for Lana, her downfall was even more pitiful. Lucas had no intention of taking her back, and Aaron had cut ties with her completely, refusing to even speak her name. The most humiliating detail? Lana didn't even know which of them was the father of her baby. She was ordered to undergo a DNA test, which eventually revealed the truth in family court. The results stunned everyone. Neither Lucas nor Aaron was the father. Lana was forced to admit she had been seeing other men at the same time, and now, even she didn't know who the father was. Aaron's family used this as a further ammunition, denouncing Lana in every legal and social avenue they could find. Her friends, her so-called supporters, one by one they abandoned her, unwilling to associate with someone whose lies had become public spectacle. Lana's once glamorous life crumbled into isolation and desperation. My mother and Lana, clinging to each other but of necessity, tried to rebuild their lives, but every attempt ended in failure. My mother turned to late-night bartending jobs, but her age and attitude made it hard for her to earn much. Lana jumped from one part-time job to another, barely scraping by, and with no real stability to speak of. Somewhere along the way, Lana gave birth to the baby, but the reality of raising a child on her own hit her hard. She posted countless pleas for help on social media, but the responses were either scathing or non-existent. I heard bits and pieces of all this through mutual acquaintances, but I felt no urge to reach out or get involved. My father, meanwhile, had quietly moved to a rural town, far away from the mess he'd left behind. He inherited my grandmother's old house and was apparently living a quiet, solitary life there. He reached out to me a couple of times, but I kept my distance, unwilling to open old wounds. As for me, I poured myself into my work and focused on building a happy, peaceful life with Mark. With Mark, I discovered a new meaning of the word family, one built on love, trust, and respect, rather than obligation or pain. Even knowing about Lana's and my mother's downfall, I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just a quiet, indifferent acceptance that they were no longer part of my world. And maybe, just maybe, that indifference was my true freedom. In my mind, Lana and my mother slowly faded into nothing more than distant, irrelevant memories. Their downfall brought me no joy, only the realization that I had saved myself by walking away when I did. But the final chapter of this story came a year later, when life handed them the justice they had been running from for so long. One day out of the blue, I received a letter from a law office. The sight of the official-looking envelope sent a jolt through me. It was from my father. Inside was a copy of his will, along with a letter explaining that he had passed away. My father had died quietly in my grandmother's house, alone. The attached documents revealed that I was the sole beneficiary of his estate. As I read further, I found the reason my mother and Lana had been excluded from the inheritance. At the bottom of the will, my father had written, "Alyssa was the only one who ever helped me, the only one who saw me as a person, not a paycheck." Those words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I had always thought I was invisible to my father, but now I realized that I wasn't. The inheritance wasn't much, a small house and some savings, but it meant more to me than anything money could buy. Meanwhile, my father's death marked the beginning of a final reckoning for my mother and Lana. They showed up at his funeral uninvited and unannounced, like vultures circling a carcass. "We have a right to his inheritance." "Yeah, why does Alyssa get everything?" They looked nothing like the polished, proud women they once were. Their clothes were cheap imitations of style, and their desperation was written all over their faces. I stood there calmly, meeting their eyes with a quiet resolve. "You've seen the will. Dad made his decision. But we suffered too. We deserved something." "Suffered? You mean from the messes you created yourself?" The room fell silent, everyone watching the spectacle unfold. Lana stepped closer, trying one last tactic. "Please, Alyssa, just a little. I have a baby to take care of." But I felt nothing. No pity, no guilt. If you have a child, then you take responsibility for it. That's not my problem anymore. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving them behind once and for all. Later, I found out they tried to contest the will in court, but their claims were swiftly dismissed. In the end, they were left with nothing but debt and each other, a fitting consequence for their years of selfishness. I decided to renovate my father's house, turning it into a place of warmth and peace, a place to start fresh. Around the same time, Mark and I discovered we were expecting our first child. I can't wait to see the kind of family we'll create together. I held Mark's hand tightly and silently made a promise to myself. I would never let my family's mistakes define the future we were building. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free. And in that freedom, I found something even greater: true happiness.